Incredible twist. Black doctor witness to kindness detained for helping white child. 750K EXPO. Dr. Marcus Reed loved his small Midwest town, a place where he was the embodiment of dreams fulfilled. As the first in his family to earn a medical degree, he took immense pride in being a pediatrician, tirelessly devoted to healing and uplifting his community. Yet today, as he stepped outside his clinic, fatigue clung to him like a heavy coat. After a long day, he sought solace in a nearby park, hoping to recharge his spirit under the golden sun. Moments later, the afternoon tranquility shattered. A small white child named Liam stumbled near the playground, his face turning purple with panic. Without a second thought, Marcus rushed forward, his medical instincts kicking in. He remembered his training and employed the Heimlich maneuver with precision. The child's frame trembled as he gasped, relief flooding his watery eyes once he could breathe again. Just as Marcus felt a swell of pride for having potentially saved a life, chaos erupted around him. "Get away from him!" A voice bellowed from the crowd that had begun to form. Marcus's heart sank. Confusion rippled through him as he was suddenly swarmed by adults shouting accusations, calling him an abductor. He could hardly process what was happening. This couldn't be real. His hands were trembling, thoughts racing. Was he really being branded a villain? The police arrived, their expressions clad in disbelief and suspicion as they scanned Marcus, their eyes filled with latent prejudice. "What happened here?" one officer asked, authority dripping from his tone. "You've got some explaining to do." Coldness enveloped Marcus, fear twisting in his gut. He stood there surrounded by accusatory fingers and swirling murmurs, realizing that all his good intentions were being eclipsed by a storm of racial bias. How could this be happening to him? The weight of the accusation left him reeling. A tidal wave of doubt crashed over him, drowning out his righteous anger. He was a doctor, a community pillar, and yet here he was, wrongly accused, heart racing, feeling the very foundations of his life teetering on the brink. How could he explain the situation to his family, friends, or colleagues? Would they see the truth beyond the color of his skin? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As he stood there, the world felt alien. His colleagues, once his allies, seemed distant, and the community he dedicated his life to now felt divided. He thought about the evening mentorship sessions he held at the community center, how the children looked to him for guidance. They had dreams of their own, dreams Marcus had wanted to inspire rather than frighten. Fear gripped him tighter than the handcuffs that now pinched his wrists. Would his story be twisted into a cautionary tale? Just when the shadows seemed their darkest, a flutter inside him stirred. The strength drawn from his family's history of resilience, the echo of his mother's voice. We do not bow down to fear, we rise. But in this moment, rising felt like a steep cliff, and he was standing precariously at the edge. A deeper question loomed in his mind. As he confronted systemic injustice, would he be able to reclaim his story, or was he destined to be a mere footnote in the very biases he'd spent his life fighting against? The winds of change were swirling, but for Marcus each gust felt like a harbinger of uncertainty, leaving him stranded in fear's embrace as he pondered the true cost of fighting back. Marcus's heart raced as the murmurs grew louder. He could see the apprehension etched on the faces surrounding him, fear mingled with misunderstanding. As he stood in the spotlight of scrutiny, he felt an overwhelming need to assert his identity, to remind both himself and those present of his truth. But how could he breathe life into his voice amid the noise that sought to suffocate him? "Please, I'm a doctor," he finally managed to say, the words piercing through the chaos. Their impact seemed minuscule against the tide of tension, yet it was his only lifeline at that moment. He was not merely a black man standing accused, He was a healer caught in the grips of irrational fear and prejudice, a juxtaposition of his life's calling against the backdrop of systemic bias. The officer's glare bore down on him. "Is that so?" The skepticism was thick in the air, and Marcus's resolve was tested. He felt a flicker of defiance igniting within him. This was not just about his innocence. It was about challenging a narrative that had been enforced for far too long. As the crowd parted, he heard whispers, some sympathetic, others contemptuous. Each word cut deeper than the last. "You're just trying to justify yourself." He shouldn't have intervened. It was a cruel reflection of a society that often questioned the integrity of people who looked like him. The police officer stepped closer, studying Marcus as if he were a case to be solved. "What's your badge number?" Marcus felt a flash of indignation. He was not a statistic, nor an enigma to be unraveled. He was a person, an irrefutable part of the fabric of this community. "Dr. Marcus Reed, pediatrician," he repeated, digging his heels into the ground as if defying gravity itself. With every beat of his heart, he sensed that this moment could either shatter him or propel him forward. "I need to speak to my lawyer," he added, realizing that self-advocacy was no longer a luxury but a necessity. It was a declaration that his life mattered, despite the weight of trepidation that hung heavily around him. And for the first time since the chaos began, clarity washed over him. He had spent years honing his skills, earning the respect of colleagues and gaining the trust of families in his practice. This singular moment was not going to define him. Instead, it would be his launching pad. As the officer stepped back to make a call, Marcus inhaled deeply. He envisioned standing before the state medical board, at community forums or in the homes of families he'd cared for, sharing his story, a story that transcended this moment of prejudice and spoke to resilience and strength. "How do I take charge of my narrative?" he asked himself, feeling a swell of determination. It wouldn't be easy. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with new challenges that could shake the very foundations of his work. Would he speak out against the injustice he faced? Would he help others in similar situations? With the stakes higher than ever, Marcus was on the brink of a transformation he had never anticipated. In this moment of crisis, a fire ignited within him, transforming the fear into motivation. He recalled his mother's words with renewed vigor. "We rise." Perhaps it was time for him to not only rise, but to also lead others out of the shadows of fear and prejudice. As he waited, he toyed with the idea of becoming an advocate against racial injustice within the medical field, leveraging this heinous experience to inspire change. Suddenly, a siren wailed in the distance, punctuating his thoughts. The arrival of the media could complicate matters even further, but Marcus felt the stirrings of resolve bubbling to the surface. The time had come to face not only the bias that had ensnared him, but also the hidden potential within himself, waiting to be unleashed. He would reclaim his narrative and, in doing so, create a voice not just for himself, but for many silenced before him. But would the world listen? With the police officer making the call, the fragmented moments around Marcus seemed to stretch into infinity. His thoughts ignited, weaving a tapestry of fears, hopes, and the potent belief that change was both necessary and possible. He was no longer just a victim of circumstance, he was becoming the embodiment of his convictions. Standing alone in the eye of the storm, he eyed the onlookers, some with cameras eagerly poised, others scribbling notes. This wasn't a one-man show anymore. It was a collision of realities, and he was at the center. Rather than retreating into the shadows of embarrassment, he felt a transformative energy radiating from within. The whispers that had once felt like daggers began morphing into a call to arms, propelling him toward a purpose larger than himself. "Dr. Reed," the officer's voice broke through his introspection. The man had returned, face still hardened, but now there was an indication of curiosity etching into his features. "We'll need you to provide identification." Marcus nodded, his heart still thundering but now with an underlying rhythm of resolve. Reaching into his coat, he fished out his wallet and extended his credentials, pushing past the dwindling fear that threatened to grip him once more. As he did, he caught a glimpse of the scene outside, where a crowd had gathered, some clapping, others shouting in outrage. He tapped into the energy around him, leveraging it to exude confidence. While the officer scrutinized his identification, Marcus glanced at the media vans, his mind racing through possible headlines and sound bites that would inevitably emerge. Alone in his thoughts, he envisioned the articles claiming he had abused his position, the demonizing undertones feeding into preconceptions already held by the masses. The weight of this potential narrative hung over him like a cloud, but the realization struck. What if he didn't just react to what was written? What if he wielded the pen himself? As the officer turned to relay information into his radio, Marcus began to strategize. This hadn't just become a battle for his own narrative, but an opportunity to carve out a space for truth and justice in a broken system. He considered how he could galvanize others, how this singular action could represent a broader struggle. He pictured himself at seminars, engaging medical students and professionals in open discussions about racial bias in healthcare. What had once been a quiet journey, masked by the hustle of everyday responsibilities, was morphing into a powerful catalyst for reform. The voices of his patients, their joy and suffering echoing in his ears, reminded him that he was not alone, even when it felt isolating. But lurking beneath the surface of his renewed conviction was doubt. The acquaintances who might turn allies could also be enablers of a biased system. What if he took a wrong step? What if he invoked anger rather than sympathy? Questions peppered his mind, yet he felt them losing power against the burgeoning intention to act. "Keep your cool, Dr. Reed," he murmured under his breath as he stood resolute, adrenaline fueling the fire in his belly. The officer's voice again broke through, but now the man was preparing to level the next charge. "You're being released, but we're still reviewing the situation." And in that split second, clarity emerged. Marcus understood that this moment, while filled with uncertainty, was also a defining point, a ticking clock of transformation. The world was watching, but what kind of doctor would he be if he didn't step into the role of an advocate? When faced with the option to remain silent or speak out, he leaned into the very identity he had fought to uphold. As he squared his shoulders, a flicker of a smile crept onto his face, reflecting both defiance and determination. The sirens might still wail, and the headlines would write themselves, but he was ready. The first move had been made, and the roulette wheel of his future was already spinning. What was he willing to lose to ensure others wouldn't suffer as he had? What sacrifices might be required to shatter the very structures of bias that threatened to absorb him? Marcus stood on the brink, the promise of a new path unfurling before him like a vine seeking sunlight. But what would happen when he took that first step? As the officer stepped back to process the incident, Marcus felt the tremors of a life-altering moment grounding him. The cacophony outside surged anew, cheers intermingling with cries of dissent. The crowd seemed like a living organism, expanding and contracting in response to the unfolding drama. With each pulse, he felt himself unravel, one thread of identification as a medical professional, another as a racial minority in a system that had often turned a blind eye to inequity. In a flash, he was transported from the chaos to a more intimate battleground, his own mind. What if he used this moment as a catalyst? What if he expressed the thoughts that had long been shrouded in fear? The seeds of change sprouted within him, urgent and demanding. Instead of recoiling from the heat of scrutiny, a burgeoning resolve emerged. He would not just react to the waves crashing against him, he would direct the tide. His pulse quickened as ideas crystallized. Public forums, blog posts, social media threads, all avenues to reignite the conversations on racial bias in medical treatment. A sense of urgency filled him. It was imperative to humanize the statistics, to lend a voice to those who had suffered in silence. He envisioned the day he'd stand in front of aspiring doctors, arms wide as if embracing the world, compelling them to weave empathy into their practice. But self-doubt loomed like an ominous shadow. What if his efforts did not lead to understanding, but instead ignited a firestorm of backlash? He contemplated the risks: professional ostracization, damage to his career, retribution from colleagues who might view him as a threat rather than an ally. Would he emerge from this crucible stronger? Or would he crumble beneath the weight of opposition? "Get your footing," he whispered to himself, anchoring his thoughts. The officer's next words snapped him back to the present. "You're free to go, Dr. Reed, but I advise you to remain available for follow-ups." The man's tone shifted, hinting at a grudging respect. Marcus stepped back into the fray, his senses flaring with awareness. As he moved through the crowd, questions abounded, cameras flashed, capturing his every gesture. Would they portray him as a hero or a villain? He marveled at the duality of the narrative in play, his fate resting not just in his hands but also within the interpretation of those watching. Upon rejoining his colleagues, the cold, sterile environment of the hospital contrasted starkly with the fiery energy of the crowd. This juxtaposition stung. In this very space, he had witnessed countless patients suffer, their stories discarded under the weight of systemic bias. How many people languished unchecked, their pain dismissed simply because it did not fit the narrative of the medical establishment? Inwardly, Marcus wrestled with the consuming realization that he couldn't be a passive observer in his own life. Reclaiming his agency was vital. It demanded not only action, but an unflinching commitment to truth. A promise echoed within him. He would not allow the fear of judgment to silence him. Back at his practice, he began to draft a plan. He envisioned workshops aimed at educating both patients and healthcare providers on implicit bias. Discussions led not just by him, but by a collective of voices, of patients, advocates, and fellow professionals willing to dismantle the biases that had marred their profession. As he mapped out potential strategies, an idea struck him with clarity. He would become an exemplar, someone whose story would inspire others to speak out. But to challenge the entrenched systems, he would need allies willing to join the fight, willing to support this burgeoning revolution. And so, the wheels of transformation began to turn within him. The air buzzed with possibilities, but he could hardly discern the path ahead through the fog of uncertainty. Would he be met with resistance from the very institution he held dear? Marcus closed his eyes, letting the uncertainty swirl around him. His heart thudded with an amalgam of fear and excitement. It was time to confront not just the naysayers but the roots of the biases that had haunted his career. The time had come to face the dark corners of medical prejudice standing in the way of his passion. How deep did these shadows run? What unexpected truths might he uncover as he ventured towards the light? Marcus opened his eyes, the weight of his surroundings pressing down on him with newfound intensity. The sterile buzz of fluorescent lights above him felt like an unyielding reminder of his reality. He glanced around the hospital, the familiar spaces suddenly feeling foreign and hostile in the wake of recent events. He had spent years here, healing patients, yet now it felt like a gilded cage, each wall echoing with voices lost in the shuffle of systemic neglect. He felt a surging frustration. It wasn't enough to draft plans and workshops without tangible action. The time had come to script his narrative, but how could he do so without invoking the ire of those entrenched within the existing framework? The thought of colleagues he respected turning their backs gripped him tightly. To quell this unease, he pulled out his notepad, filling the pages with ideas. The notes began to morph into an outline for the first workshop. Understanding implicit bias in medical treatment, he scribbled at the top. Each word was steeped in the urgency he felt. He envisioned a series of sessions, real conversations among diverse participants discussing their stories without fear of judgment. But as he drafted, doubts crowded in. Did he truly possess the persuasive power necessary to unearth the biases woven into every decision made within these walls? Imposter syndrome reared its ugly head again, whispering cruelly that his background made him just another voice clamoring for attention, rather than authentic change. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself why he started this journey. For the patients whose voices had been stifled, for those who bled silently while the system turned a blind eye. It was these poignant memories that fueled his determination. He reached for his phone, dialing a close friend and fellow physician, Dr. Chelsea Harper. Chelsea was known for her fierce advocacy and medical ethics, and he trusted her judgment. As the call connected, he spoke quickly, urgency weaving through his tone. "Chelsea, I'm working on that workshop about bias. Can you help? I need someone to bounce ideas off and keep my vision grounded." "I'm in," she responded without hesitation. "What do you need from me?" He outlined his vision, his heart racing as she guided him to refine his approach. They brainstormed case studies, interactive components, scenarios that would ignite emotional connections among participants. Each suggestion she made seemed to chip away at the fortress of uncertainty that had begun to envelop him. Soon after, they discussed the project's potential backlash. "Marcus, it's vital to frame this workshop not just as a critique but as a collaborative effort to enhance our practice. The goal is to uplift every patient, regardless of demographics." Chelsea reminded him. The conversation enlivened Marcus's spirit. In that moment, he envisioned a group of diverse practitioners engaged in frank discussions, dismantling biases together. But the need for continued collaboration nagged at him. Who else could share this vision? He needed a strong coalition robust enough to weather scrutiny. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows in his office, Marcus recalled a tension-filled meeting he had attended months earlier. The division chief, Dr. Richards, an old-school practitioner with rigid beliefs, had dismissed concerns over bias as unfounded. Even now, the memory burned. How many times had he held his tongue when he should have spoken up? Soon, gathered courage transcended mere desire. It transformed into a visceral need for confrontation. He took a moment, closing his eyes again to zone into that unwavering feeling of purpose mixed with trepidation. He imagined Dr. Richards squaring off against him. Could he endure the scathing retorts? The mere thought ignited the fight within him. It was time to march into his superior's office, armed not just with his ideas but with a fundamental truth. Marcus knew the path ahead would not be without conflict, and a chilling realization accompanied him. Stepping into unknown territories meant risking everything. But he had made a promise: to pursue integrity and change, irrespective of the obstacles ahead. With resolve solidifying, he stood, squared his shoulders, and walked towards Dr. Richards' office. What awaited him there could alter the course of his career. The ultimate confrontation. Would he discover the fortitude to face not only a colleague, but the systemic shadows that had muted his voice for far too long? As Marcus approached Dr. Richards' office, adrenaline coursed through his veins. Each step felt like a pilgrimage toward the truth, yet with a weighty uncertainty gnawing at his resolve. He paused outside the door, placing a hand against the cool wood. Was this the moment that would define him? The stakes loomed larger than life. The need for change drummed in his chest, almost drowning out the objections whispered by his doubts. He knocked softly, instantly regretting the gesture. It felt too timid, too conventional for what was about to unfold. The chaos and urgency of his mission clashed with the decorum expected in a senior physician's lair. However, the sound of "come in" commanded him to action. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, the sterile scent of antiseptic mingling with something more acrid: resistance. Dr. Richards sat behind a vast mahogany desk, his posture rigid, eyes piercing through reading glasses that perched precariously on his nose. The elder physician looked up with a mix of curiosity and disdain, as if he were analyzing an inconsequential specimen. "Marcus," he said dismissively, "what brings you here?" "Thank you for seeing me, Dr. Richards," Marcus began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'd like to discuss a critical issue regarding implicit bias in our treatment protocols. I'm working on an initiative that aims to address this comprehensively." A scoff escaped Dr. Richards' lips as he set the papers down. "Bias? It's a buzzword plaguing our profession. Our methods have been effective for decades. Are you really suggesting we need to change?" For a moment, doubt washed over Marcus like a flood. He had anticipated this very dismissive tone but had underestimated its potency. He clenched his fists, activating a buried fury. The voices of his patients echoed in his mind, reminding him of their pain and bewilderment. "Dr. Richards, with all due respect, our effectiveness must be measured not by historical precedent but by current patient outcomes," he replied, taking a tentative step forward. "Studies have shown that biases can lead to discrepancies in care. Every day that we ignore these issues, we fail to provide equitable health care. The old man's fingers drummed against the desk, a subtle sign of agitation. Your arguments are mere theories, Marcus. The real world is messy. Are you willing to risk your career on ideas that might not hold? The challenge dangled in the air, and Marcus thundered at the provocation. If I don't challenge the status quo, then who will? How many more patients must suffer at the hands of outdated practices? The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could almost see the gears turning in Dr. Richards's mind, the path of privilege and denial colliding with the hard truths he was laying bare. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown to a revelation or a breakdown. This isn't just about me, Marcus pressed on, throwing caution to the wind. This is about the collective responsibility we have to our patients. People like you and me have the privilege to advocate for change, but that privilege can also cloud our judgment. A flicker of realization crossed Dr. Richards' face, perhaps a recognition that jigsaw pieces were shifting into place. The confrontation didn't just center on bias, it pierced through layers of integrity and ethics, challenging the very foundation upon which medical practice stood. "I'll think about it," Dr. Richards finally muttered, his voice low, mirroring his reluctance. Marcus nodded slowly, a small victory emerging from the confrontation. Though he didn't receive the affirmation he sought, a shift had occurred. He was no longer simply the young physician paralyzed by anxiety and self-doubt. He was becoming an advocate, pressing forward into uncharted waters. As he walked out, energy surged within him, fueled by the uncertain power of his own voice. Each step away from the office felt lighter, a release from the weight of silence he had carried for so long, but questions loomed like shadows around him. What repercussions awaited him for this newfound courage? Would others rally alongside him or turn against him in fear? Would he become an outcast or a beacon of change? The answers fluttered on the horizon, tantalizing and terrifying. He knew he had ignited a storm, and now he wasn't sure if he had the capacity to weather it alone. But deep within, a pulse of determination surged. The journey was just beginning, and he was ready to confront whatever lay ahead. Would his newfound strength draw allies or enemies as he transformed his ambition into action? Marcus stepped into the fluorescent glare of the hospital corridors, the rush of adrenaline still echoing in his bloodstream. Dr. Richards's hesitance left his mind buzzing with countless thoughts, but beneath it all thrived a current of exhilaration. He had planted a seed of doubt in the old man's rigid mind. That alone felt monumental. However, alongside this thrill came a congestion of anxiety. How might Dr. Richards retaliate? What would be the cost of defying the status quo? As he progressed through the bustling hallways, Marcus resolved to channel his energy into proactive measures. He glanced at the faces around him, nurses tending to patients, orderlies bustling about, and fellow physicians caught up in their own routines. Each of them embodied a piece of the social tapestry, a reflection of the human experience he fervently aimed to understand and advocate for, but they were also potential allies, if only he could figure out how to reach them. He paused in front of the staff lounge, allowing the sound of laughter to seep in. An idea sparked within him. A meeting, a dialogue. If he could organize a discussion on implicit bias, it could open the door for his colleagues to share their perspectives and challenge their own assumptions. He envisioned a space where ideas flowed freely and experiences were laid bare. With newfound resolve, Marcus rounded his shoulders and approached the lounge. Inside, he found a group of doctors engaging in lively conversation. He hesitated only for a moment before stepping through the threshold. Their chatter stilled, heads turning his way, curiosity glinting in their eyes. "Hey everyone," Marcus began, his voice steady but infused with urgency. "I'd like to propose an idea. What are your thoughts about having a meeting to discuss implicit bias in our treatment practices?" The response was an assortment of raised brows and sidelong glances. One of the senior residents, a woman named Jessica, leaned against the counter, arms crossed defensively. "That's a hot topic, Marcus. You sure everyone's ready to dive into that?" "Honestly?" he asked, then continued. "I think it's overdue. We have the chance to improve our systems and patient outcomes. Ignoring this won't make it go away. We should be part of the solution. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, but skepticism remained layered beneath the surface. Sounds idealistic, another voice chimed in, a senior resident named Tom. What would we gain? A weekend workshop on something that could just be a case of bad luck? Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the tension. What we gain is a better understanding of our biases, what drives us unconsciously. If we can challenge our own assumptions, we might prevent further harm to our patients. How many patients need to slip through the cracks before we say enough? Jessica nodded slowly, recognizing the weight behind his words. You're right. We should discuss this. But it needs to be constructive, not confrontational. We have enough divisiveness as it is. With that, a tentative plan began to take shape. Marcus felt a slow thawing in the air, the collective consciousness shifting from skepticism to cautious engagement. They agreed to meet after hours to explore the initiative further. As he left the lounge, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of triumph. He hadn't just survived the day, he had ignited a flame of discussion, kindled hope, a chance to influence change within the institution. Each step felt lighter, but also fraught with the awareness that potential allies could still morph into adversaries. Marcus knew, however, that with each conversation about bias came a personal reckoning. How would he present this side of the issue without alienating others? Would opening up lead to vulnerability, risking everything he had fought for? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm hue against the cold hospital walls, Marcus sensed another challenge looming on the edge of opportunity. It was time to prepare not just for the conversation, but for the stir it would unleash. How would he handle resistance when faced head-on? He gritted his teeth and faced the uncertain path ahead. But deep down, a flicker of conviction rested, aligning with the question that would shape his journey further. Would he stand firm against a tidal wave of opposition, or would he bend in the face of resistance? As dusk settled into night, the hospital's emergency room glowed with a frenetic energy that Marcus found oddly comforting. It was a reminder of why he dedicated his life to medicine. Yet the fluctuations of his apprehension remained, coiling tighter around his thoughts. He adjusted his scrubs and approached the fluorescent-lit meeting room, prepared to face a multitude of reactions. The shadow of uncertainty loomed large in his mind. Would the discussions ahead empower them or inadvertently stir resentment? He found himself questioning whether he was a catalyst for change or merely a disruptor. Each step toward the meeting room was heavy with the weight of intense scrutiny from his peers. A jury weighing his intentions against the backdrop of their shared experiences. Inside the room, 6 colleagues had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Marcus cleared his throat, scanning the collected expressions, grounding his thoughts in sincerity. "Thank you all for coming," he began, determination mingling with the rising tide of his nerves. "I know this isn't an easy topic, but it's an important one." Jessica, seated at the head of the table, gestured for him to continue. "Let's hear what you have to say, Marcus." He glanced at the notes he'd prepared, a fragile anchor amidst his swirling thoughts. Implicit bias affects all of us. I've seen it in our patient interactions, and I believe it's critical to open up these discussions. But this needs to be a two-way street. Tom's brow furrowed, picking up on the undercurrent of urgency. "So, what's your vision? A workshop to induce guilt? We're all professionals here. We know biases exist." The challenge in Tom's tone ignited the defensive spark within Marcus. He took a step back mentally, forcing himself into a calmer, analytical space. Not guilt, a conversation around awareness. The more we ignore our biases, the more we risk perpetuating harm. This isn't about blame, it's about understanding and changing for the better. A silence enveloped the room. Marcus caught Jessica's thoughtful gaze. It hinted at the potential for growth. He pressed further. "Imagine the outcomes we can influence, really positive amendments in our practice. If we don't address bias, we are complicit in the suffering of our patients." Jessica leaned in, encouraging the discussion to take shape more organically. "What if we start with sharing personal experiences? It would be less confrontational. It could foster trust among us." As conversation flourished, ideas ricocheted around the space. Marcus felt alive. Every voice added depth, and he observed how their concerns unfolded acknowledging the reality each faced in their practice. It was a heady moment of camaraderie. But just as the synergy began to crystallize, the door swung open. Dr. Richards entered, overshadowing the room. Marcus's pulse quickened. He could feel the collective pause as they awaited their mentor's judgment, suddenly hyper-aware of the vulnerability they had all exposed. "What's going on here?" Richards asked, voice unnervingly calm. "We're discussing implicit bias, Dr. Richards," Marcus answered, passion tainted by anxiety. Richards raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched into his features. "You all really think this is the best use of your time?" The chilling edge of his question cut through the hopeful atmosphere, thickening the tension lurking just beneath the surface. Questions swirled in Marcus's mind. Had he overstepped? Would this be the clash that defined his standing in the medical community? A silence gripped the room. He could feel his colleagues' eyes shift between him and Richards, the fraught energy palpable. It was a moment of reckoning. Would he retreat in fear as unexpected opposition framed a battle he never intended to fight? Or could he push beyond the initial skepticism and defend the integrity of his convictions? The air shifted, charged with potential. Marcus knew he had to respond. One way or another, a decision loomed. The glimmer of resolve in his heart clashed against the dread of failure. "Dr. Richards," he started, rallying his composure. "With respect, this is exactly why we need to talk about bias." The battle lines were drawn. The next moment would either solidify his position among his peers or lead to devastating isolation. What would it take to break the silence and stand firm against the tide threatening to sweep him away? Marcus felt a weight thud into his stomach as he spoke, the words tumbling out like a fragile house of cards. The silence that followed echoed, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension. He was acutely aware that this was not merely a meeting about bias. It had transformed into a crucible for his character. Dr. Richards' expression remained steely, yet Marcus saw something flicker in the mentor's eyes. Perhaps interest or bemusement. Tension clawed at the others in the room. Their belief in his vision wavered, leaving them suspended between support and fear of reprisals from Richards. A battle was in full swing, and he was at the center of it, flanked by the conflicting ideals of progress and tradition. He drew a deep breath, the rush of adrenaline sharpening his focus. "Dr. Richards, whether we like it or not, our biases shape the way we interact with our patients. If we dismiss this conversation, we risk perpetuating an unequal system." Richards crossed his arms, leaning back in his chair, and Marcus wondered if he was readying for an argument or simply assessing the landscape. The urge to wilt under the pressure screamed at him to back down, but he stood firm, channeling the strength he had cultivated over years of demanding training. "Tell me, Marcus," Richards replied, his tone low and even. "What do you hope to achieve? Are you prepared to face the backlash this might provoke?" The question reverberated through him. He had thought about backlash, the potential for ostracism. Yet many moments of hesitation had only strengthened his resolve. Progress isn't without pain. If we can't embrace discomfort in our discussions, then we're choosing stagnation over growth. Two pairs of eyes glanced down, sleeves rustling as pens hovered uncertainly over notepads. He caught Jessica's gaze again. Her nod transformed his uncertainty into a rush of determination. Marcus felt he was no longer merely defending an idea. He was fighting for his place in a community that could either uplift him or cast him aside. The discussion on bias could frame the way we approach not just our patients but each other. We work as a team, and if we can't communicate openly, we'll never reach our full potential, he continued, stepping deeper into conviction. Richards studied him, weighing each word, and Marcus sensed the facade of indifference wearing thin. He dared to continue. "Imagine if we created an environment where everyone felt acknowledged, seen, and valued. Isn't that worth the risks?" The old doctor's features softened just slightly, but Marcus remained cautious. This wasn't an opening, merely a brief easing of the storm. The momentum in the room had shifted, eagerness and curiosity sparking in the other doctors, though Richard's skepticism still loomed. With a purposeful nod, Marcus shifted gears, feeling a boldness swell from within. Let's model what we discuss. Each of us shares a time when bias affected our practice. No judgment, just honesty. We can explore our vulnerabilities together. Tom's eyes flickered with interest, and a quiet murmur of agreement wafted through the group, like someone stirring a pot of simmering anticipation. All right, Richards finally replied, his voice maintaining a tinge of reluctance. I'll give you this chance, but understand, you're stepping into uncharted waters. Don't expect everyone to be on your side. His heart raced, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through him at the challenge laid bare before them. It was a leap of faith, but perhaps the most important one he had taken yet. Marcus needed to prepare himself for what lay ahead. The tide had turned slightly in favor of difficult conversations, but where would this lead? What would the fallout of this decision be, not only for him, but for the team? As they began to engage in the personal stories that lay beneath their professional facades, Marcus felt the gravity of the task ahead. This was just the beginning. What truths would surface? At what cost would they seek transformation? The moment dawned stark and raw, revealing pathways of uncertainty ahead that he hadn't anticipated, pushing him further into the depths of his own convictions. Would the resolve to confront bias cultivate the awareness he hoped for? Or would it fracture their fragile camaraderie? The atmosphere in the meeting room buzzed with a mix of apprehension and curiosity as Marcus and his colleagues ventured deeper into the conversation about implicit bias in their medical practice. One by one, stories emerged, vulnerabilities laid bare, each thread revealing a tapestry woven with fear, misunderstanding, and, crucially, possibility. As Jessica spoke of a patient whose pain had been dismissed because of who he was, Marcus felt a collective sigh of realization that filled the room. Each colleague's account resonated, grounding them in a shared commitment to their duties as healers. It became clear that these accounts weren't simply confessions but invitations to change, a recognition that their roles extended beyond stethoscopes. Marcus took the lead, carefully guiding the conversation toward actionable steps. I propose that as our initial commitment, we establish a task force dedicated to exploring and implementing strategies addressing bias, not just in our direct practices but throughout our policies, he suggested with resolve. The nods and murmurs of agreement emboldened him further. He could see the potential for genuine change take root among his peers, a chance to transform discomfort into discussions that mattered. Even Dr. Richards, though still stoic, appeared to contemplate the implications of what they were discussing. The conversation rolled on, spark after spark igniting a shared purpose. They began to formulate ideas for workshops and training sessions, creating a roadmap to transparency. Each contribution from his colleagues evolved the discussion from abstract concepts into realistic applications. Marcus felt more grounded now, no longer a single voice against a tide of skepticism. He was part of something larger, a movement to reclaim not just his narrative, but the narratives of all their patients who bore the brunt of neglect and bias. By the time the meeting concluded, the group had committed to monthly discussions focused on bias, determined to commit their profession to growth. Their scattered apprehension transformed into a clear path forward, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a wave of fulfillment. This moment marked a pivotal point, not just in how they practiced medicine, but in how they would relate to one another as a community of caregivers. As Marcus stepped into the bustling hospital corridors, he reflected on how far he had come since that fateful day in the park. No longer just battling for his voice in a system that saw him through a prism of bias, he had transformed that sense of isolation into a clarion call for collective reflection and action. He had proven to himself that he could champion change, even in the face of adversity. Recognition of their initiative soon burgeoned throughout the hospital. The task force, which began as a small group of physicians, developed into a robust program embraced by administration. The stories shared became the backbone of training sessions, highlighting the humanity often overlooked in clinical care. Months later, at a significant departmental meeting, Dr. Richards stood to commend Marcus and the team for their dedication to cultural competence. "Let us not forget the courage it took to start this journey," he proclaimed. "Your commitment to the betterment of our practice is commendable." Marcus felt pride swell within him. He was no longer the apprehensive physician doubting his place, but a recognized leader advocating for systemic change. As applause filled the room, he soaked in the moment, a tangible acknowledgement of success won through persistence. That day, he realized his perspective had transformed entirely, from fearing the consequences of confrontation to embracing the power of vulnerability and leadership. He had learned not just to advocate for himself but for his community, transforming a personal trauma into a beacon of hope. Tangible results emerged. A biannual community health fair focused on education about implicit bias, partnerships with local advocacy groups, and an ongoing commitment to engage where systemic injustice lay unexamined. Marcus had generated a movement, catalyzing transformation within the institution while addressing the broader narrative around healthcare inequity. With solid confidence in his abilities, he stepped onto the stage to deliver a closing address at the first community health fair. The exhilaration of sharing his journey with other medical professionals inspired countless connections with families eager to learn and engage. Today, he began, taking in the faces before him, is not just about education. It's about understanding our shared responsibility toward the community we serve. Together, we're making strides to ensure that healthcare is equitable for all, regardless of background. He realized that his story had become a shared heritage, an echo of resilience he hoped would empower others in the field. This was his achievement, to turn a moment of chaos into a legacy of advocacy. The defining question now wasn't just how he would approach adversity, but rather how he could continue to forge a path for those entwined in the very fabric of their healthcare narrative. As the applause resonated around him, he committed himself to the journey ahead, ready to rise, uplifted by a community fueled by hope, progress, and justice. You need to subscribe now to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories that explore the heart of overcoming personal struggles. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and ensure others can join us on this transformative journey. Comment below with your reactions and theories about this incredible journey. Your insights are vital. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this powerful conclusion. This is the moment to show your support.